live in a world that is filled with myths, half-truths, alternative facts, and outright lies. Attempting to understand and make sense of human trafficking in the 21st century is made that much harder thanks to the world we live in. That's why today I'm going to address and debunk the top 5 myths about human trafficking. Myth 1. Human trafficking victims need to be transported or moved to be considered victims. Reality. In November of 2000, more than 100 countries agreed on an international definition of human trafficking with the signing of the United Nations Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially Women and Children Agreement, which is commonly referred to as the Palermo Protocol. Through this agreement, the United Nations defines human trafficking as shown on the screen here. Notice the emphasis on the means, which includes threats, force, and multiple forms of coercion. The same year the United Nations secured an international definition of human trafficking, the United States created its own national definition through the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, commonly referred to as the TVPA. Similar to the United Nations definition of human trafficking, the TVPA places emphasis on force, fraud, and coercion as elements of trafficking. The TVPA defines human trafficking as shown on the screen here. Again, notice the emphasis on means of trafficking that includes force, fraud, and coercion. Both of these widely accepted definitions do not require movement for someone to be qualified as a victim of human trafficking. Myth 2. Human trafficking is sex trafficking. Reality. This is confusing for many people, as researchers have found that everyone from college students to police officers misperceive human trafficking as being largely or entirely sex-based. A 2015 study found the inability to separate sex trafficking from prostitution led officers to make remarks that human trafficking is simply a form of prostitution, while another officer believed that human trafficking is actually just prostitution. Additionally, the International Labor Organization shows that sex trafficking is nowhere near as pervasive as labor trafficking. The International Labor Organization's 2017 report, The Global Estimates of Modern Slavery, stated that there were 4.8 million victims of forced sexual exploitation in the world, which accounted for 19% of all human trafficking victims. This leaves more than 80% of human trafficking victims suffering in non-sexual forced labor. Seasoned human trafficking researcher Sidith Kara reported that sex trafficking may comprise less than 6% of all human trafficking victims in the world, but they generate 40% of profits. This increased earning potential and media attention on sex trafficking contributes to the myth. Myth 3. Victims are kidnapped. Reality. Going back to the definition of trafficking, we see that force is only one of 3 ways used to traffic someone. Kidnappings that lead to human trafficking are possible and have taken place, but are rare compared to cases that are a result of coercion and fraud. Traffickers look for vulnerable people they can exploit through manipulation. Many victims come from rough homes, have endured previous abuse, and are in a position that makes them vulnerable. A 2014 study of more than 140 traffickers identified the key method of recruitment the sex traffickers used to find and retain sex trafficking victims was manipulation. Their techniques included using sexual or romantic relationships and making promises of a better lifestyle. The case of Frida Farrell is a horrific example of fraud being used to lure a victim into a situation where they can be trafficked. Ms. Farrell was approached by a man who claimed to be a photographer. After accepting an offer to participate in a photo shoot and having the photo shoot go well, she showed up to the would-be trafficker's supposed studio, where he drugged her and moved her to a separate location where she was sold for sex for 3 days. Luckily, she was able to escape, and in a courageous act of resilience, she has made a movie that documents how she was deceived into human trafficking to help others avoid being deceived into human trafficking as well. Myth 4. Most victims are foreign. Reality. Many reports and articles find that domestic victims make up a majority of known human trafficking victims. A 6-city study on child sex trafficking in the U.S. found only 3% of the participants were non-U.S. citizens, meaning that 97% were U.S. citizens. This finding shows that most victims that are child sex trafficking victims in the U.S. are U.S.-born children. The Global Report on Trafficking in Persons 2018 found that most victims worldwide were domestic victims as well, with 58% of human trafficking victims being abused in their own country. Different regions of the world experience different rates of domestic victims, with the Americas being the region of the world most likely to see individuals trafficked within their own country. Even worse, the trend of domestic human trafficking appears to be growing. Myth 5. Men's involvement with human trafficking. First, men are not victims of sex trafficking. Reality. According to the Global Trafficking in Persons Report of 2018, after looking at information provided by 54 countries, it appears that boys and men make up 6% of all sex trafficking victims that are identified annually. While 6% may not seem like that many, this finding means that 1 out of 20 sex trafficking victims are male, and that certainly qualifies to debunk the myth that men are only labor trafficking victims. If you're wondering why you have never heard that 1 in 20 sex trafficking victims are male, it's because there is little attention given to this group of victims. In a review of 166 studies related to the global sex trade, a 2008 analysis found that 84% of the articles only mentioned female sex workers. Second, traffickers are always men. Reality. A DePaul University study found that 25% of pimps that could potentially be classified as traffickers were women in the city of Chicago. The Global Trafficking in Persons Report of 2018 found women were the trafficker in 27% of cases from around the world. And an analysis of 6 years of data on arrests of sex traffickers in the U.S. who trafficked minors found amongst 1,416 sex traffickers, 24% were female. This shows whether it's a major city in the U.S., the entire country, or the world, those who are willing to make others suffer as victims of modern slavery are not limited by gender. Bonus myth. I can't do anything to help. Reality. You can do so many things to address human trafficking. Many people think all they can do is volunteer with a nonprofit or donate money to a group already fighting against human trafficking. While those are great ways to contribute to the fight, there are many other ways that you can act by refusing to do nothing. You can start by reading books that directly tell you what you can do to address human trafficking. These books include The White Umbrella, Vulnerable, and Refuse to Do Nothing. These books and others like them detail how you can make conscionable choices when shopping at the grocery store and at retailers to make purchases that support goods produced free of labor trafficking. This might not seem impactful until you understand that something as simple as chocolate is harvested by children in other countries, with estimates as high as 40% of all cocoa being produced through slave labor. This means you purchasing non-slave produced chocolate helps support responsible production of cocoa around the world. This is true for many other industries as well, including coffee, clothing, sugar, and more than 100 other goods produced off the backs of labor trafficking victims. Other efforts you can make can be more creative, as detailed in the book White Umbrella. A wedding photographer looking to make an impact decided to donate a portion of his earnings to a nonprofit that helps victims of sex trafficking if the couple getting married would agree to forego wedding presents and instead ask their guests to donate items that would be useful for victims. This has led to the Love Gives Way program that is currently in more than 13 cities around the country and able to connect more couples looking to make an impact. Rather than listing the dozens of ways that you can address human trafficking, I would like to detail the areas where you can make an impact. In Refuse to Do Nothing, the authors suggest that everyone has relationship power, advocacy power, and purchasing power. Within these respective areas of power, you can do something about human trafficking. From attending a conference on human trafficking with a friend to writing a local legislator about supporting a bill that addresses human trafficking, there are opportunities all around you to use what you already know in combination with your desire to stop human trafficking. That's it for this episode of Human Trafficking Hater. Did this episode help you better understand human trafficking? Are these myths that you used to believe before today? I would like to hear some other myths that you have heard about human trafficking, so please share in the comment section. Thank you for listening to Human Trafficking Hater. If you're interested in getting more content about human trafficking, how to address it, and how it impacts millions around the world, please subscribe and join us as we continue to hate human trafficking and raise awareness.